Okay, it being 7:30, I would like to call the meeting to order. We have a full board tonight, but as usual, I will ask Michael to comment, but he has voice without vote. Our first order of business, I believe, is the minutes from the last meeting. Do we have them, David?
Paper copies.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may not have a vote, but I can do something.
That's good to know, Michael.
In your case?
Thank you, sir.
Glad you have a real skill.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's
There we go.
It's good to know these
Do
things.
you have one already?
I have a couple corrections.
Great. Please proceed.
Page 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th paragraph, all requested the board take recess. Some members could read the additional information should be added in.
Yep,
The additional, oh, yes.
I have a few more on that page before you. The planning and zoning administrator passed out packets of supplemental.
Where is this?
Third paragraph.
And then the 5th paragraph, next to last sentence. They were just brought into the process and needed more time, I believe is the term that belongs there.
That makes very good sense, yes.
We've got another one on the same page.
And then,
But go ahead.
Barnett's 4th is spelled wrong.
Yeah.
Where is that?
The last
line.
line.
Okay.
And then at the end of that, for housing,
Where was that again?
second word.
What paragraph?
Last line.
Last line, oh, okay, there we are.
They
Yeah.
all do these, they'll just write them.
No, I did these minutes, not you, so.
But you
You're
should
all
be
set.
guilty anyhow.
For not being here. Then at the end of that, for housing wide economic, and it says along wide economic, I wonder if that's supposed to be a cross.
Or just housing.
I do not
Cross
know.
reads better.
A cross
Well-
would read better, I think.
Along a wide economic spectrum.
We can say across, that's, I'm happy to change it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I didn't have any more after that. Oh, because I got into something else instead.
I'm sure the 20th.
Great, Michael, thank you very much for your care on that.
Page 1, 2, 3, page 4 near the top. I'm just curious as to whether, the first full paragraph, Robert Allen.
Yep.
Second sentence says, Frank noted that Mr. Roby's testimony is historical information only. The ordinance itself does not restrict the conversion of buildings built to specifically be converted after the 5-year waiting period. Is that what you really said or meant?
My comment was, I don't think it's wholly inaccurate, that it's historical information, and David indicated that that was the intent of the section in the planning, or in the zoning ordinance. And that, but what I was saying was that the language does not restrict it to historic buildings.
Historical.
Yeah, in other words, buildings, it's a 10-year period, it's a 5-year period.
You
And
can build a
that's-
brand new building, let it sit there and still qualify under the zone.
Exactly, that's.
That's what he was trying to say.
That's what I was trying to say.
And Mr. Roby was telling us in the past, it's meant to be able to deal with historic buildings.
Such as Record Root Farm, for
Yeah.
example, buildings
Yeah.
like that, where you would
Right.
then convert it to apartments. And-
Or the barn.
Yeah, and I said, this is correct, and this is historical, but this,
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Next page, template. First line. Construction is stated to include 1 11-unit structure. That's correct. the
We,
board.
we'd asked for clarification on that, because I was uncertain as to those are the correct numbers.
But that's correct, that's
is
what
what-
was said.
Yeah, that is what was said.
Something was missing, because I remember Alan saying something about whether the drive would be classified as a road. And I went to item 20 on the last page, I guess. Second last page.
19 is driveway versus private road, down bottom of that page,
Right,
bottom of
stop
page
there,
5.
right.
Driveway versus private road.
Okay, I think that's where I was at with the rest of it. Driveway versus private road, that's curb cut. The applicant stated that we believe that the drive serving the co-housing unit qualifies as a driveway and the Lyme zoning ordinance says buildings to the road does not serve more than one lot.
And then there was comments made, and I simply observed that if that was not acceptable as a driveway, it would require a separate variance, because it would be viewed as a private road.
Okay. And I thought Alan had said something.
He did,
Yeah.
no, he did,
Yeah, all right.
very specifically.
Right.
We could add a sentence saying, Alan brought up the question as to whether this could be, why don't we do that? Alan
Yeah.
brought up the question as to whether this could be viewed as a driveway. He thought it was probably properly viewed as a private road.
Yes.
Does
I
that
still think
conform?
that.
Yeah, does this conform with what everyone remembers? That is correct, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
David, are you comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay, good, thank you very much, Walter.
And then there was another comment that was made, I didn't catch it in the minutes, look at, it could be under either 21 or, I guess I slipped it into 22, but there was some note that the horse maid, no, the driveway, I guess. Total length of proposed driveway is 1375 feet from the parking area for building D, most building distant. And somebody also noted that a major portion of that driveway was going through the wetland area.
I believe
I
that's
do
correct.
remember a comment to that effect.
And I don't know who said it, but there was some comment by one of the board members that noting that
I think it was probably Dan.
it could be. So might be worth adding it to.
Can we add that, please, David, that, wetland area or wetland buffer? I believe wetland buffer.
Buffer,
The
right.
wetland-
I think it's
The
buffer.
wetland
Wetland buffer.
conservation district.
Yeah,
whatever it
wetland
is.
conservation
Whichever,
district.
I don't know.
It was in the wetland conservation district.
That sounds right.
Great.
I can't find it anymore.
That's wonderful, thank you very much. I care a motion to accept minutes.
As amended, so moved.
Second it?
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion, no objections being heard, the minutes are accepted as revised. Our task this evening is now to proceed with the rest of the decision, the draft findings of fact, and then to proceed tonight, for however long it takes, to a vote on the requests. I think we've all been here long enough and gotten a lot of data, and the time is now to finish this, however it comes out. And we'll go from there. So David, do you want to pass them out? I took the edited minutes and incorporated them into this,
This 7-page document.
I'm afraid so. But it does have a line in it that says where we got to last time. Thank you very
Oh,
much,
I missed
Michael.
that.
You have one, you want another one?
Oh, okay.
No, I'm set.
Right there. I said
You're set,
yeah.
you're set.
So we're in deliberation?
And I was
We haven't done
about
that
to
yet.
accept, have a motion to go into deliberation.
I so moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're now in deliberation again.
So if we're in deliberation, first question I want to ask, because we've got
We've
a
got-
new submission by the applicant.
Yeah,
Is the present or the latest version of their variance request
compatible with,
consistent with anything they've given us in the past? It seems to me it reads quite differently.
horrible feeling, you're right.
then we may have a whole different set of findings that,
Would be relevant to that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just gotta find it in all the papers here.
We have too much paper.
It would be nice if there was a machine that would take and compact all this stuff, shred it and glue it together so you could burn it effectively in the fireplace.
Probably have negative energy impacts.
Okay. So we need to review it versus what I wrote here. This may be irrelevant now.
Some of it, you mean?
Yeah. But no, I don't think I don't think the basic body of findings is probably very relevant. But my requested relief may not be correct. I still don't understand why the terms use and area variance keep creeping into here. Because my understanding is these two have been merged.
Effectively, they've been merged, but there was a comment somewhere that I saw in here where they're still being treated as separate. And I think it's in this document, ADG.
Yeah, no, I realize that the applicants are making this distinction,
Right.
but the handbook
Well,
for,
they're putting it by price, it's not a distance.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I thought, the same standard.
Are we obliged to accept the applicant's statement?
Right.
Which one?
The
What-
ones that contain all this clarification?
Oh, I don't know.
Good question, Bill. Alan?
There is a member of the audience that would like to have input if we are so desirous of going out of deliberations.
I think it would only be good to do that. May I request the board consider a motion to go out of deliberations?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Bobby?
That document was submitted in response to the request from the board
Yes, it was, yeah.
to clarify the variance we're looking for. It wasn't intended to deviate from the discussion that you had at the last meeting, essentially going through
Yeah,
what we filed, the original application, and coming to your conclusion that what we were requesting was consistent with that initial application. We were just attempting to distill it into fewer sentences. So it wasn't intended to deviate. If it causes a problem in terms of deliberations, I would tell you to jettison it and disregard it. It was an attempt to clarify, not to change
Right.
the original application.
fine. Thank you, Bobby.
In addition, and I'll just, since I have the floor, the additional things that we submitted were in response to, again, questions of the board. The questions on phasing, unit pricing, again, the co-housing sort of summary of what's proposed, the gross floor area lot coverage calculations reflect the individual structures that were requested. Ryan had amended that form, he's not here, but that chart to identify the separate structures. And then Stuart Arnett and Jonathan Edwards presented their written comment that followed what they mentioned last month on the workforce housing analysis. So
Thank you very much.
nothing was intended to deviate from where we've been before.
The question that I have is just a matter of clarification for myself.
Yeah.
And that is that this Pinnacle Co-housing Project 529-2015 document is an expanded number of columns from what we initially saw that I thought, if my memory serves, we only had two.
It actually started with 3. It went to 2 because they were looking, 3 was unit phasing, 2 was construction phasing, so it combined
Oh, okay,
financing and
gotcha.
construction. So what we did with that was conform the 2. So it is 3 phases, but for terms of construction and financing, the first 2 were
Which is
combined.
the pro forma.
Which is the pro forma. So it
Right.
started 3, went to 2, and now we're bringing the 2 together.
I have 2 questions. One
Yes.
question is there a reason for the difference between this, Ryan, description of the development and this spreadsheet?
Which spreadsheet?
The one that Alan just had in his hand. I don't know what it is.
The last 3-column document
The
is the
three
Pinnacle
column.
Co-housing
Right.
project.
Yeah, there's this one.
Yeah.
The 3-column Pinnacle Project talks about, where is it? Somewhere on one of these sheets.
You might be,
I'm on the wrong sheet of paper. Where's the one that we just got?
that should be this.
And I got one that says something, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Up at the top it says 14 market in phase 1, 2 workforce housing. Phase 2 is 10 market, 1 workforce. Phase 3 is 8 market, 1 workforce. Liz Steinfall's memo talks about 11, 9, and 8. Do you guys know how many units?
They're inconsistent.
Yeah, they are.
Which one is right?
Overall or phasing?
11, 9, and 8?
The numbers, the number of units.
In each phase,
Yeah,
yes. That has shifted, my understanding is, as they've been delving deeper into
which one's right?
how the construction works. It's
To be
not a
honest, I
question
wrote
of right or,
both of them.
You wrote both of them?
Right.
right.
Okay.
Liz, your totals add up to 32, and the chart shows 36. So which is
The chart
correct?
is correct. 36 is correct for workforce.
Right, so 32,
Charts.
And I don't want to
24 and
11, 9,
8 is
and
32, plus the workforce comes up to 36.
Six.
Okay.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
see the additions going there. It's just,
That it's the
it would be nice
four.
if it was reflected in the documents.
It's
I
in
think it
here.
is in what I wrote, I hope.
It's
Yeah.
in the 3-column.
14 and 2 is 16, 10 and 1 is 11, 8 and 1 is 9.
But your
That,
memo doesn't have those numbers.
That's right.
Right. So,
the original phasing has them.
we just got 3 pieces of paper today, and I read through them quickly, and 2 of them didn't agree. So I'm just asking for which ones were right.
What
There was a
does it-
memo from Liz Ryan Cole, and it says
Yeah.
3 numbers in terms of the phasing, and this one has different numbers. So I just want to know which one is right, or which one you guys...
Well, the answer is 36. It's consistently been 36, and if it doesn't say 36 in my memo, I'm very sorry.
Okay, it doesn't say 36 in either, it just says the phasing.
Yeah, this sums up to 36, I believe.
Here it is.
My memo should sum up to 36.
Right, the memo says
Don't you
12 and
think?
2,
No, I'm just saying.
9 and 1.
Using them enough.
Yeah.
and 8 and 1.
So they both sum up to 36.
Hmm?
Well, your memo's all,
Yeah,
Oh, my memo.
yeah,
yeah.
the memo's dropped a couple, so you're right.
14
Yes.
plus 10 plus, plus 8.
Anyway,
No, they
Right.
don't add up.
Well, that may be right after all. Yeah, I just redid the math. Once I thought I had seen a problem, and I find I get
Oh, I see.
36 again. It's in the 3rd paragraph on the Liz Ryan Cole thing. And it's 12 market, 2 workforce, and the
8
first
members,
phase.
8
Right.
members who want to build, and 1 who's in workforce housing, which is 9 at the final phase, so I think it adds up.
9 and 1, and then 8 at the end.
Plus
That-
1.
Where's the last, and 1, oh.
And 1 member who
There
wants to
is,
build
it
workforce,
is
they're all.
a bit off,
they're-
yeah.
so, okay, so
But-
it's, the chart is right.
The chart is correct.
It's the chart.
So the other question I have is, since this latest version of the request for variance is different in some of the words, and it's supposed to be a clarification, which specific piece of paper or statement accurately reflects your request. Which piece of paper can I
The
refer to?
initial application,
Okay.
we spent a lot of time on that.
Do you really want to say that? Do you really want to say
You
that?
sure?
I mean, because the second sentence of number 1 is new and number 2 is new from the original application. I would have thought you were going to go with this.
I thought you were gonna go with this.
Yeah, I gotta agree.
So how do we vote?
The one that we just got today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought this was the
But
one
the
that
one
discussed.
that's here today, and we've obviously been through a long process. And 2, the variance on lot coverage is part of the explanation. Again, it goes to how we got there. And 3, again, this is in response to board questions in terms of if the buildings are connected, considered one building because of the connected walkway, we need the extra variance. So I've tried to take from our initial application, gather in what we've been through the past few months, and put it all into a one comprehensive, but hopefully simple statement.
Which one do you want us to use to vote on?
This or the
I don't think there's a
original?
trick there. I don't think there's a trick there. think
I
it's
don't
just-
know
I'm
that
just- I'm trying to figure out what,
The normal procedure, we submit an application and the board votes on it, but this has been an evolving process. So,
We realize that.
right, so I would look at, this is our best,
this one.
this is our best
so
sort
this is the document we're using,
From here forward.
so
until
that
we
it
see another
becomes the
change.
document,
Right.
no, because
It's the
it's gonna be
document of
done
record.
tonight. This
Yes.
is the document of record,
Right, okay.
that's fine.
The application still stands, though, I guess is my point. It hasn't been removed from.
No.
No.
No, we're not,
Right,
we're not
yeah.
taking it as having been removed, and to let the record show that. that,
I think the only thing that we're trying to do is say that
Right.
this amends the original application's wording to reflect what we are now trying to work on.
Right, and it wasn't our intention necessarily to amend, but to conform to the discussion. So,
Yes, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Yep.
It's fine, thank you, Bobby.
You're welcome.
Any other questions before we return to deliberation?
One other,
Sir?
and that is that in item 1 of this June 1, 2015 document, I see 2 variances in one.
That was my question, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
So we have 4 variances?
That's what it looks like to me.
I think we've had this
Bobby, is that
discussion in the
a
past.
correct interpretation of this document?
If you recall, the original application had 2 alternatives.
Yes.
Last month's meeting, there was a great deal of discussion on how to correlate those, if you will. This is our attempt to correlate. The primary variance is a use variance, which exists, but as you've discussed, has the same test standard as an area variance now.
Right.
So we're looking for a multifamily use in a district that doesn't permit it.
Understood.
The way we get there is based on other portions of the ordinance. So you take that, the density that gets us there, and then there is a restriction after conversion of no more than 6 units in a building. So if the board considers, if multifamily takes care of all those restrictions, you don't need this second half of it. What I wanted to point out is there are more than 6 in 2 of the buildings, less than 6 in the others. So if you look at our original application, we were looking for a reconfiguration. Here I've just tried to focus on the fact that 2 of the buildings technically are variants. So yes. Yep.
Thank you, Bobby.
And 4 are less than 6.
Does that clarify, gentlemen?
That worked, that does it
Okay.
for me.
Shall we go back into deliberation?
Move to into deliberations.
A second?
Hearing a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Everyone, we're back in deliberation? Okay, at this point, what is your pleasure? We got on this long list, which again is nothing but thoughts to be worked with. And sorry about the misuse of Latin there. We got to number 22. And is it your pleasure to continue working through these to see if they're relevant, and then as we do deliberation on the variance requests themselves, to then simply say, this request is supported by the following findings, fact, numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Bill?
I wonder if under number one, we're going to proceed to decide just one issue, which is whether to allow multifamily housing in the rural district, or if we're actually going to decide on at least three pieces that the ordinance, that this application touches on. One is multifamily, the other is conversion, and the third is restriction of the number of buildings per unit, or number of units per building.
And what is your thoughts on this?
I have mixed feelings. I guess it certainly streamlines things if we just look at it as multifamily, but I don't think that does justice to the ordinance. Because there's a clear provision there about conversions are allowed.
Yes.
Under certain circumstances. But, and certainly the other aspect of it is the restriction on more than 6 units per building. So that's, although that's outlined here as a separate issue, but it seems to me that there really are three tests. There are three sections where the ordinance would need to look at it. But I could be persuaded otherwise, but I mean, that's my instinct.
No,
is
thank you.
that
Yes.
We have to at least acknowledge that the ordinance says something different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Rob, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm not sure. It seems to me that we're going to have to do a fair amount of work to finalize whatever we do with the findings and the variance. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't proceed to some discussions, general discussions on the variance issues, without necessarily
Going through this?
because
Okay,
I'm
that's
not sure
fine.
we're going to finish it tonight. I'm not sure we might have to delegate to a committee some writing up of what we talked about. Because I have no idea where my panelists are, and I think we ought to have some discussion on the actual variances themselves. Now, it seems to me that the primary variance they're asking for is for the multifamily housing in the rural district. The other three being sort of subsidiary, but nevertheless have to be addressed separately.
Could you pass that down to Bill, please?
I tend to agree with you that we need to, if we,
Would you mind sharing that with Rob?
if we can't put multifamily in the rural district, then it dies. I have one. Thank
You do. This is just,
I've got one.
yeah. Okay, there are several copies available, but
I want to go.
What I'm saying is that I think we should work on what we think is the essence of the variance that would be required to get past the multifamily within the rural district before we worry about whether we have issues with the other three. I'd like to take it in that order myself.
that sounds quite reasonable. Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, well, I wanted to get some sense of the board whether we were going to just decide on multifamily and ignore the other two sections that seem to be called on.
We're not going to ignore them.
I don't think
by any
That's
means.
maybe a poor choice of words, but.
Yeah,
No,
I understand.
But, or hold in abeyance, or whatever term you want. And I think we have to go through the list.
I think we do too.
So your goal now would be to get a sense of the meeting, so to speak.
Well, I was asking the question because as it's written, it sounds as though we just have to say yea or nay on multifamily, but.
No,
I mean, I think it's clear that just wanted, I'm just
Yes,
expressing
I
my
think we
concern.
have
that
to, in every case, go through what the request is, decide that, and say what our findings of fact associated with it are, and this is going to be a time-consuming process.
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of writings on.
I have some scribblings, and I'm not sure they all make sense, but I will start with those if
Why don't you
everybody
do that, please?
gives me some broad leeway as to what I've written and whether I make sense or not. But I started with the first test of whether to grant the variance or not, which is the granting the variance would or would not be contrary to the public interest, and then because. And in order to do that, I thought that, based on what I had seen in the New Hampshire Board of
Yeah.
Adjustment manual,
Yes.
page, I forget which, but it's towards the top of page of 210. There's some italics at the top line that say, that's the back of page. The effect of the variance must be evaluated in light of the goals of the zoning ordinance, which is in chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
And that might begin or end with a review of the comprehensive master plan upon which the ordinance is supposed to be based. And so that's where I came from. And then I looked at the ordinance, and it says that it's, the first itemized purpose is to implement the Lyme master plan. And then of the others of that I thought were most pertinent, and only in that reference, would be D, E, and F. Avoid undue concentration of population, prevent congestion on the roads, and avoid traffic hazards, and prevent overcrowding of land.
And then that speaks to Master Plan 7 and 8, which is our criteria number 2,
Yeah,
which preservation of Lyme's rural character is dependent on successfully integrating new development, et cetera.
et cetera. And then it also says in the master plan, it then goes to say,
Page 1-9, for example.
page 210, I believe, that the line, it does, in addition to that, there is a bullet on page 210 that says that the Lyme Common District is recommended to be
Yes.
enlarged. And then I then had the thoughts that if we were to, if it were to be enlarged, the first obstruction that enlarging the Lyme Common District would run into is the ag soils to the south and west and northwest,
Yes, which are heavily used as ag soils.
heavily used as ag soils and not very amenable to septic systems, being a fairly tight clay material. And that then said to me, since the east is not developable or not amenable to enlarging the common district because of steep slopes, as you go up past the fire station here, that we're stuck with pushing the Lyme Common District down beyond this intersection here and possibly as far as the pond.
Where you also run into the whole shelf there, which is basically the same land,
Right.
which is a relatively short area before you get into steep slopes again.
Yes, right, but you do have some area
Yeah.
there where you can, there is some sections of between here and there that might be bony enough to be
Yeah.
not amenable to development if my visual
But that
examination of
fundamentally still leaves us with the,
Right.
a number of statements in the master plan, such as page 1-9, saying new multifamily buildings are not favored. Conversion of existing large buildings to dwelling units and single-family homes is the preferred form of residential development. And the underlying statement there is, again, as I read it, older buildings. Not,
It was intended as that, yes.
the
I believe
problem
so,
that I
too.
have psychologically with the conversion option is that, is the intent of the ordinance to have a new building built for the specific purpose of leaving it half-built inside because we don't have an inspection system,
Right.
so it can then be made into something else after a period of time.
That is certainly possible if you
Yeah.
want to waste the money that way.
But that's the literal interpretation of
Yes.
the 5-year period.
Right.
I can build a structure I can
Put a
decide
house,
what
put a
I'm,
unit in the corner of
put a
it,
unit in the corner of it, and then 5 years later, I can come along and make it into a
flesh it out, yeah,
multi-dwelling, and that's the literal interpretation of the
Yeah.
ordinance will allow that.
right. I think so too.
And that's my reading of the literal interpretation of the ordinance. But,
We have had other documents provided, I'm not sure I can put my finger on, but, because the binder's really in the backpack, but we've had discussion about other changes, proposed changes to the ordinance, specific in general.
Yes.
About expanding and changing zones, and I think that might be relevant to point to those efforts under the public interest section.
yeah.
I don't know where else it would fit in but that.
No, I think that's correct, but the materials that we have to work from,
Or either the master plans or the ordinance.
or the ordinance, not what it might be.
Yeah,
No,
So
exactly.
I wasn't referring to what it might be, I was referring to the fact that the town did not vote for the change that was proposed.
That's correct.
That might have had an impact on this,
Right.
on the development of this property.
Yeah,
And that's the only thing I'm talking
Okay, I see what you mean. That was the initial where
I
they
mean,
withdrew.
the public interest has been
Or
formally
the only
stated
vote that was
by the
was made,
public.
yeah.
about. Yes.
My own impression of that, if I may, is that that was primarily defeated because of a clause that they had inserted that particular chapter would supersede any of the rest of the ordinance. And I think a good number of people,
I found that a little troublesome too, but nonetheless, it was voted down.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
right.
if there's anything we can infer about public interest, I think that would be part of it, I would think. Yeah, but
I think one of the things that is difficult to grapple with here is I think there's a widespread feeling in the community, which has been made clear by a lot of letters coming to us from members of the community, that many people in the community would favor changes in the future which allowed for things like co-housing or multifamily development, etc., but that's not the laws we have to deal with.
correct.
What we have to deal with is what's on the books. And it does not, our deliberations cannot speak to the goodness or desires of that. I mean, our job is to interpret the law.
Yep.
And you,
Well, you want some other opinions?
sure, please.
My take on the public interest one is that the general intent that the applicant had to try to utilize various provisions in the ordinance to create a co-housing development is not contrary to public interest. The proposal they've given us, however, in terms of size and scale and intensity, would significantly alter the essential character of that area.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is not in public interest.
I guess I have a little bit of problem with the size, the issue that we see here. And that is because we have 26 buildings on the land side of Route 10 on the Lyme lot that, as far as I know, could be converted to year-round housing, as well as any summer cabin that is on a single structure on a single lot, that only needs insulation and heating in order to become a year-round residence. And if you looked at those 26 houses and put them right beside what is proposed, it's only slightly, not even 150% of what exists there now that could be developed. Granted, it's not.
But it would make a significant change in the character of the area.
Just the conversions of
Just
those
the
year round would
conversion,
make a significant
But that's
change.
that's legal.
That would be legal.
That's totally
That's,
legal.
that's where I'm coming from.
I'm not sure, I agree with that.
Okay.
It's a change in use. It would have to go through some process. I haven't looked through it.
I agree with you there.
But I don't see how that could happen. And I think in the past, the zoning board may have addressed it at some point. I'm not sure of that either.
I'm
But I
not
wouldn't
sure.
jump to the conclusion that it
Could happen.
could happen or could happen easily.
Okay.
In any case,
So.
I'm more troubled just by the wording of what we're allowed to do.
Yeah,
First sentence.
Well, the application is to,
4.1 Mike.
Residents.
is to,
4.41.
Yeah,
You can't convert them into a bunch of individuals, at least the way, without
Right.
some relief. You're
you're right.
you're right.
oh, I was talking about, yeah, okay, so I'm more
Or not,
concerned
yeah.
in just dealing with the application
Right.
with the fact that they want a variance that would permit multi-family co-housing development in the rural district. And table 4.1 says that's not permitted.
Yeah.
So if we permitted a variance to do it, we're basically changing
The law,
the law. It's illegal.
it's illegal.
What is legal, you know, ignoring the other stuff which has to do with some 6 structures and density consistent,
Right.
there is only one principal building and one principal activity on a lot. That's
That's what it
section
says.
441.
That's true.
Yes, that's what it says.
Unless otherwise approved under lot size averaging subdivision provision, multi-dwelling and conversion provision, or the plan development provision. All of those are triggered by site plan review by the planning board.
Right. So we can't
And
give a
we-
variance to go around them.
Well, we can't abrogate the responsibility and the power of the planning board.
That's right, that's what they, that's another way of
So-
saying what I just
Nor
said.
should we.
Nor should we.
So I think dealing with just the first sentence, the first request, by what criteria could we possibly grant more than single family or single building, principal building, principal activity division? If we just deal with the criteria to do that, we can get a cleaner decision. But that's my opinion. I don't know that we have to deal with any of the others.
That's a very interesting argument, Paul. Yeah, I mean, the handbook is very clear, it says the ZBA may not change the law.
Right. I saw that.
The law says X.
With the caveat that there is a site plan review for the rural district for a large
But-
structure.
Also,
Yeah.
To be conducted by the planning.
but it has
yeah.
to be conducted by the planning board.
Sure.
But the issue is, we can't change the law, so we can't grant it. We can't grant them the approval to go to multi-family co-housing development in this district. And we particularly can't do it if we find the 5 criteria
Mhm.
and deal with the 5 criteria
Which we must.
that,
And we would anyway.
that we need as a test
Yeah.
against whether we possibly could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So maybe we just need to do that.
Are we looking for the narrowest line of thinking to make our decision or to evaluate this?
I think that has, as Walter has pointed out very clearly, considerable virtue.
That's my sense too.
Okay.
That fundamentally, again, I have to say, I feel that the whole co-housing thing, this is a condominium development.
Yeah,
It's what it
multifamily,
is.
period.
Multifamily development, however you want to name it.
Yeah.
The co-housing is not relevant to our discussion in a large sense,
Not in the terms of the ordinance.
not in
no.
terms of the ordinance. This is
I would agree.
this is an attempt to put a multifamily development in the rural zone.
Yeah.
however structured or named.
Yeah, right.
However, that is different from co-housing. I mean, if you looked at a Cobb Hill, it's a single, or the one in Peterborough, they're single residences.
That's correct.
Which are feasible, which could be done. And
That's-
so that's, if they had chosen to do that, they could do that.
No, they could have come to us for a variance in order to put more than one residence on a
Yes,
lot.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but at least it is something that could be done.
Or they could subdivide the lots
It's not,
further.
and that's not a multifamily issue per se.
Great.
That's
It's a
right.
co-housing issue, yeah.
But the also thing is that they could go, there's another whole path for constructive use of the property, which is to try for a further lot subdivision based on lot averaging or whatever they want to do for the planning board.
Right.
And so that, in one sense, by saying, we see no path to go around table 4.1, it does not deny them constructive use.
No, that's right.
Is that an agreeable thought? They presented in their documentation, if you don't do X, we can do Y.
Well, I'd just like to go back to Rob's comment.
Great.
You can have detached, single-family condominium properties.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, you just
Yes.
heard. So the word condominium doesn't imply
It's
multifamily.
irrelevant.
Well,
It
Correct.
typically does, but it by its
But you're
own-
correct,
but-
yeah,
but
you're
it need-
correct.
So whether this is a condominium
Or
or
not
an
as-
or I don't know, whatever other configuration.
No, thank you, Bill. That's
you
a very
want
good
to point,
clarification.
It is ultimately always going to come back to being multifamily because of the way the units are clustered in each building.
Yeah.
I mean, I just to get the
No, I think your
vocabulary out of the way.
clarification's a good one.
Condominium is not relevant, co-housing is not relevant, it's just it's several buildings with more than one family living in each building.
Right. In the application, yes, that's exactly what we got.
Yes, no, thank you.
I'm just trying to,
Yeah, no, I think
Narrow
you're
the-
doing exactly what we want to do, which is to narrow this down and focus it. So, gentlemen, do you want to just go through these and say where we are on each one of these? 4.1, we basically, my sense of the meeting is that the feeling is that it is contrary to the public interest.
are you looking for a general confirmation of that, or are we trying to construct the specific?
Well, that's the question I'm bringing up, actually. How do you want to proceed, so we can actually keep,
We'd like to get through this or something.
yes.
I'd be satisfied this evening with a general sense on each one of these, but obviously we're gonna have to come back at some point, and fill it in, alternative.
I think we may very well differ in our reasons why something is or isn't, but I think there's a
that's the case.
consensus, at least, on the issue that it doesn't meet that test. Now, it is gonna be a challenge to write it at some point as to the rationale.
Sure. I think we could spend a good part of the rest of the evening going through public interest. And I know we'll have to do that at some point. But I'm wondering if it would be useful to see if we can get through all 5 criteria in one meeting, and then you can have a subcommittee or however you.
I think we have to do it in a public meeting,
We
Rob.
can-
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, my goal is to try and get this moved to the point where we can develop, as urged by Walter, the simplest possible statement of where we write, each criterion either met or not met, without too much wording associated with it, and so that we can proceed ahead, because we've agreed that we need to go through all 4 of these things. But once we have made our decision on the 5 criteria, it is likely, is it not, and I asked this question to the board, that we would be in agreement on all the variances on the same criteria? Or would they differ somewhat?
They might do.
I think they might differ.
They might differ, fine. But we need to be able to basically give a dare.
I then, if if you'll forgive me.
Certainly, sir.
Interrupting. If one of the variance requests does not apply,
Yeah.
then do we need to go through the others?
Let's put that discussion off till we do it.
I hear you. Okay.
There's some consideration, I think, in terms of efforts of application, and obviously the implication is severe, but I still think there is an issue of addressing, at least in some form, I think.
The rest of what they
Yeah.
In
request.
some form
Yeah.
in some form of fairness.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's fair to them.
That would
To-
be
to
fair, then,
everyone.
yes,
Yes.
that's true.
I mean,
Yeah, I tend to agree.
also, I would, I think we're saying the same thing in that, we need to be seen as responsive to everything.
Correct.
Because it could then, this is my assumption, and I think all our assumptions, this is going to litigation, particularly given one of the documents we given today. Nonetheless. Okay, so how do you wish to deal with the public interest then? What do we want to say right now? Or do we want to move to the next criteria? What's your feeling?
Let's move.
Let's move, okay.
Okay.
The spirit of the ordinance.
The spirit of the ordinance.
Well, the objectives of the rural district are to protect the existing pattern of rural land uses in the town and to maintain and foster traditional agricultural pursuits, to encourage the most appropriate use of land, and to facilitate adequate provision of community services. Less intensive land uses are permitted in the rural district to ensure that the uses complement each other and are consistent with the existing character of the district, and to minimize demands placed on town services. And that's the definition of rural district, or the statement about rural district.
I think that an argument could be well made that the character of the locality would be significantly altered to, whether for better or worse, by the granting of the variance. And that's that second of the
Yes.
last three paragraphs at the bottom of 210.
Yeah.
At the same time, though the district absolutely, as the definition you read, you also have to deal with, on some respect, of what's on the ground. And what's on the ground is a resort that is 26 buildings, it's the adjacent lot. I understand
Right.
it's not this
Right.
lot, but this isn't in a vacuum. We aren't sticking
Right.
this, we aren't sticking this up in Moody Bailey's field.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the implication of the definition of rural district, but there is something
There's a prior use.
for this criteria.
Right. But the other thing that's been brought up is that the fact of granting these variances would then open the rest of the rural district. And that,
That's true.
I take that as very much against the intent of the ordinance.
That implies something that may necessitate a finding.
Yes.
Which is that this property isn't significantly different than the rest of the properties in the district.
That, we have to make that.
We'd have to make that finding.
Because that is definitely in 5.
There's one other finding I'd like us to make, but I suspect the rest of the board might not agree with it because it doesn't stay narrow. But the applicant has made a great deal of the fact that they think they're restricted, our conservation district overlays are overly restricted. I think we need to confirm what's said in the ordinance, that namely that those are consistent with general zoning practices, and they're appropriately established to confirm that the land is only used to its capability. And, I think that's going to be a critical issue down the road.
I suspect you might be right.
I agree with that. Walter?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Bill? I don't think there's any disagreement on that at all.
The
No.
whole purpose of the districts is to conserve them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the spirit of the ordinance, right there.
That is, right.
No, I think your finding point is a very good one. Any other thoughts on the spirit of the ordinance?
I have a couple,
Good.
and they may overlap things already said, but I believe that the proposed development concentrated in, so I think it's a small 3 acre or
3 or 4 acre.
3 or 4 acre area, represents a substantial increase in population density that isn't seen anywhere else in town. I think if you look at any other section of town, the Common, Lyme Center, the population density is significantly lower. Taken just in people per square foot, per acre, whatever you want to do.
Per square footprint?
Or whatever. So that flies in the face of the zoning ordinance and the master plan, which is specifically aimed at reduced population density, specifically in the rural district. We want the concentration of population to remain in the Common and other areas.
Common and Lyme,
Right.
Lyme Center.
Lyme Center.
Yeah.
I think Lyme.
And in the commercial district,
Yeah.
which where it's specifically permitted.
Similarly, planned developments, which would describe, which this proposal would qualify under, are restricted to other districts
The commercial district, yeah.
where the population density, where the focus is on keeping population density at levels that are controllable in order to control services and
Yep.
limit extensive services outside these districts.
Because the commercial district has 2 high-density applications in it now.
I believe the proposed project places an additional burden on the schools. It's a 7% increase perhaps in population at the school, although if it's stretched over a period of 5 or 10 years, at 2% or 1% a year, it probably doesn't represent a significant factor. I believe the safety hazards in this area are under-presented in testimony. I drive that road several times, most days, and although my observations are qualitative, I think the crossing in that area is an accident waiting to happen. I'd be mortified if an elderly person chose to live in that place and made the trip across the road. So I'm concerned about just pure road safety in terms of traffic. I also believe that, as Rob pointed out, this development has a severe impact on the existing wetlands and ag soils. And that's clearly contrary to the intent of the zoning ordinance and conservation districts that are established under them. So those are the 4 or 5 issues.
Spirit of, but you're listing these actually under spirit of ordinance. And that's fine, correct, okay.
These are specific, I believe these are specific violations of the intent
Yes.
of the ordinance.
Spirit.
Yeah.
Of the ordinance.
To play devil's advocate, I think we need to be quite clear on how we word this and what we use to discuss those issues, because if with 100 acres or 90 some odd acres there, I would have thought that agricultural uses would have been continuing on that land if it was at all productive commercially primarily. Because if I look at what's going on at Record Ridge, I see a commercial farm, and that seems to be about the kind of operation that does keep that kind of land, the ag soil land, A, open and productive, and B, is a good use of the land, but I don't see that, I believe that these are local ag soils. I'm not so sure about the state, although there is a small area of state importance ag soil there. But that is, I'm not sure where that state importance ag soil is located. And I think we want to be clear how we use those.
Well, if you read the Conservation Commission's letter,
Right.
it's very clear, and as an observation I'd made in the notes I did from my visit, it said, look, there are two chunks of what look like perfectly good ag soil here, where the buildings A and B and C and D go.
Right.
But the rest of it is, by the admission of the soil scientist, you're not gonna grow much there.
Right.
Other thoughts on that? How about substantial justice? I do have a comment here. It came out of various readings I was doing, and here's what I've written down. Justice to Pinnacle is outweighed by the substantial harm that might be done if dense development was allowed in the rural district. In other words, substantial justice has to be weighed to be part of both the community and the applicant. And I think there's reason for real concern that once you have granted a variance to intensively develop the rural zone, then you must open it in law to others.
I have a similar observation, slightly different wording.
Good.
I see no substantial justice to the applicant in granting a variance. I believe that a variance would result in substantial injustice to the town who have clearly defined the intent of and the limitations on uses in the rural district.
Good.
And I think I could add some things to that, but for the moment, that's enough. So I agree with you.
Thank you, sir. Even if I can't do the Latin right.
Part of that finding is the fact that if the variance is granted to this kind of development, it relies on the other finding that we're going to have to deal with, which is whether this particular property has some unique characteristics in reference to other properties in the rural district. If there are no substantial differences in topography and ag soils and wetlands and proximity to Route 10 and all the other things that are claimed, then there's no reason we could justifiably not grant variances to other large tracts of land of similar feature.
Yes.
And that would be a substantial injustice to the town, as well as a strict violation of the ordinance.
Yeah. Okay, so any other thoughts on substantial justice? Bill?
I'm not sure if this is the way the term is to be applied, but I've always thought of this section to be extraordinary circumstances. Not necessarily hardship per se, but some extraordinary circumstance of either the application and or so forth, that allowing or approving the variance would do substantial justice. In other words, when this was written, let's just say some obvious use was overlooked.
Yeah.
Right? You say, there's absolutely nothing wrong, it's within the spirit of the master plan, but just not
permitted.
Not specifically permitted here. And so substantial justice would be. So I'm thinking along those lines about the terminology, which is a little different take than what we've discussed so far. But having said that, I don't find it. So I'll leave it there.
So you agreed with my first sentence, no substantial justice to the applicant, because none's required.
Well, there isn't, I don't see any substantial justice being done.
No.
There's nothing unique or extraordinary about what needs to be done.
Yeah.
That as
Would
the ordinance
would rectify-
would go forward.
No.
I
I like your,
I don't want to
Logic
tie
better
it
than mine.
to hardship,
Right.
but I think there is that implication.
Yeah.
Let me build on this, because I would probably differ from both of you on this. That is, that I suspect the applicant's next step will be to say that the issue of substantial justice relates to the workforce housing, which is the tail wagging the dog in this instance, and that substantial justice would be accomplished because such a development would permit additional workforce housing. And that may be the arguments made. I don't feel that they've made the showing that it's either valuable or significant because of the 10%. I would be willing to go further and say, gee, maybe this is one of those things that hadn't been thought about. That should be a provision in which you use a variance, but I don't think they've made the showing in this case.
So that would be a finding.
Well, depends what the rest of the board says, sure.
Well, I mean, we haven't really, we have a lot of new information
Right,
tonight, for
right,
example,
right.
plus testimony earlier about this, which I don't know that I felt we ever, at least since I've come before, we've actually grappled with and said, well, yay, nay, this makes sense or doesn't make sense, or it influences our decisions. So I would defer. I
Yeah.
think that's an appropriate
Yeah, I
thing
do
to
too.
consider under the substantial justice.
I'll get to the another point there, which I'll come to in a minute, which is some, interestingly enough, if we move on from substantial justice to the values in surrounding properties, I don't think we've been presented with data one way or another which would say that they would be affected.
I can't recall anything
Yeah,
that's,
I mean,
that addresses that.
Yeah, I mean, the so-called comparables that we were given to say they wouldn't be were scattered all over the map. And so I would tend to discount that letter from a realtor, who's actually, after all, been paid to say this.
It could have been volunteer.
Could have been volunteer, right.
Well, but also more importantly, to the extent that there are some things that adversely would affect
Yeah.
the owners, a lot of those could be dealt with conditions.
Exactly.
Screening
It could be,
and
et cetera, et cetera.
So, I mean,
But-
that's not.
Still, I
You mean the butters?
Well,
Yes.
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
ask about it.
When we put it this way, if the thing hung on that, I don't think we'd be on very, very good ground.
No, I don't think so. I think-
And then, so I think we move on to unnecessary hardship.
Well, I have a couple of
Sure.
comments on property values. I agree that the information we've gotten is all over the place and of dubious quality, let's say. But I view it as a situation where, first of all, I believe there will be an impact on property values of some sort. I believe that the people across the pond have a reasonable chance of suffering losses in their property value, and even some of the abutters along Route 10 who expressed some dismay about the thing. I personally believe that. I also believe that there are some fairly large landowners along Route 10 not too far away that whose property values would immediately skyrocket. And as a result of this, because of the availability or at least whatever they perceive as the board's willingness to
The crack in the dam, so to speak.
interpret the ordinance in the way that they do if we granted the variance.
Right.
So, if, to the extent that a finding has to be that there will be no diminution of property values, if we have to find as a fact that there is no decrease in property values, I couldn't vote in the affirmative for that, because there's not enough information, so.
Right.
So that particular criterion would fail by me, even though I think it could, a lot of the properties could go one way or the other.
If it has to be binary, I would have to agree with you.
Yeah, I think.
But I think
I think that one
But I
is a
think the
wash.
finding would be exactly what you just said, Walter, that some property values could conceivably drop, others might rise due to the availability of development, which has been found contrary to the intent of the ordinance and other findings.
Yeah,
Is that a fair way to put that?
Sure.
I think so.
Okay. So,
Well, there's one other point we might look at, and those, the places where the property values would likely go down testimony has been those places that are already inhabited. The places where property values might go up are largely ones that are
Right.
Unbuilt, unimproved.
Unimproved.
So, I'm not sure what you put in the, I don't know if it's dollars
That's-
and dollars,
No.
I
but,
don't see there's any way to quantify that.
just to Walter's issue, I mean, there is a distinction that can be made between property where people now live and those where property is largely
Yeah. But, however, nothing says that property where someone now lives
Couldn't become.
couldn't become.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched an excavator take apart a building today, and it didn't take him very long.
What, 2 hours?
Well, anyway, I don't know
Yeah,
if that's
right.
it, okay.
Yeah.
We do, when we're doing special exceptions, we do take testimony from the butters. And
Yes.
I have no opposition, but,
Yeah,
or,
right.
this stinks, I don't want you to do it, so on.
Yeah.
So we do elicit that
Yeah,
information.
and we've elicited many comments, both pro and con on this, and they're part of our public record. So we feel that the question of values of surrounding properties, I mean, the honest thing
Indeterminate.
is indeterminate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the only honest thing we can say.
I would agree.
And that in our view, the variance does not rise or fall on this criteria. Does that sound fair?
I don't know whether it rises or falls, but I think we've had testimony to both
Both
Oh,
effects.
correct.
both
Yeah,
effects.
yeah.
That's all we need to say.
Yeah, we've had testimony to both effects. And so we go to unnecessary hardship. And just, I believe we did.
That's the first
Yes, that was the first one. Yep.
Okay.
You're welcome to ask to return to it, Walt.
Well, it depends on when we're gonna record information for
A finding,
facts.
Yeah,
findings, yeah.
yeah. And
Not
how much
yet.
we use what we've written out already and how much we do new.
Well,
I mean, a lot of what got written out was simply to try and get thoughts down on paper. There's nothing special about it. One of the things that is observed in several writings I've said is whether the test is whether granting the variance would alter the essential, the hardship criteria, character of the locality. And the other thing that does come up, we were referred to a number of pieces of prior decision litigation in various writings. And the one that does come up is Garrison versus Henniker, in which was, as you may recall, the case of an explosive business that wanted to set up on an ideal location from their standpoint, but that the board found that, in fact, the fact that the location was ideal did not change the fact that it didn't have a special set of a special characteristic of the property which would allow them to make that decision. Basically, the court found that being ideal for business purposes or other purposes is not the same thing as being unique for zoning purposes. And you all have that writing somewhere in your
Somewhere.
And
I remember seeing it.
we're all familiar with the land there. And is there anything about it which strikes any of us as being different than the adjoining properties? We've also been given a set of maps which show conservation overlays, slope, and aspect of many adjoining properties, and they all look pretty similar.
They do all look pretty similar. My concern was that a number of them are quite remote from the existing site. There are several.
But there's several adjacent to it.
There's several adjacent,
Yeah.
Which may be sufficient
Yeah.
and should be sufficient
I
for
mean, the
our
argument
purpose.
has been made, so a number of arguments of considerable ingenuity, in fact, have been made. But that I don't feel the fact that Alclam Lodge is an existing hospitality business and group of summer camps creates a special condition of the property. That's created by the owner on the land.
I'm not sure I follow you on that one.
So an argument was made by council
Hmm.
that the property is special because Loch Lime Lodge is there.
Right, but it is not on the land that we're talking about.
It is not on the land we're talking about, but it's also a created condition of the land. It is not an inherent condition of the land. And just one-
Is that some of the terminology?
No, that's why I'm using that,
Okay.
purely, and I'm
Okay.
perfectly open to criticism on that matter.
It does create a uniqueness. If there was a pre-existing, hypothetical, pre-existing gravel pit next door, pre-zoning, David wrote zoning, but he didn't write it 50 years ago. If 50 years ago there was zoning there, a pit rather than the Loch Lime Lodge, that pit certainly would make a unique circumstance of what you were going to do with the adjacent lot. The question is, does the hospitality business, because it would create the hardship to not get a variance perhaps for a commercial use, is that a residential use next to an ongoing gravel pit would be impractical. It would inhibit the zoning implication of not allowing me to have some form of use that would not be severely detracted by the gravel pit next to it. That's what I was trying to get to. So I think it has some input in terms of being adjacent. The fact that the applicant is also the owner next door, on one hand is relevant, on the other hand, my sense, has absolutely no relevance in terms of looking at this application.
The applicant is Pinnacle Project.
Understand.
That is not the owner of Loch Lime Lodge. So they're
That's
not
my
the
point.
one and the same person, although the principals, maybe, but we don't know that.
Yes, we do.
So,
We
Yeah.
spelled it out.
okay.
Well, I personally find no special condition on this property that distinguishes it from
Yeah.
other
No.
neighboring properties or other properties in the rural district. If you look at the Route 10 corridor, all the way from Hanover to Orford, what you see on the east side is steep slopes,
Yeah.
and what you see on either side of Route 10 is mixes of various kinds of agricultural soil, various grades of agricultural soil. Major areas of wetlands combined with some streams, small ponds, and to me, that's what defines the rural district,
Yeah.
except for the town, the small area that's the center of town. So there's nothing that being distinguished. I think the few maps that we were supplied with, I think those are sort of cherry picked to give good examples of mixtures of
Mhm.
ag soils and wetlands and stuff.
But they do show the adjacent property.
They show the adjacent property, some of
That's all
them
I
are close by,
mentioned.
the next property to the south is owned by the same owner on both sides of the road and has a property line right down onto the pond, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
what's the difference? I don't see any distinguishing differences. And beyond that, there's this test for the relationship between, a substantial relationship between the zoning ordinance and the proposed use. I think there is a substantial relationship between the zoning ordinance and the proposed use. The zoning ordinance clearly prohibits this kind of development in the rural district because of the population density of it. And to me, allowing a variance, even just on that basis alone, is legally indefensible. I don't think we could do it.
Let me flip the other side of
Yeah.
what you just said. I mean, since they can pursue other
Yes.
residential development on the property, then you can say there is a fair and substantial relationship between the ordinance and their property. I mean, they're
Oh,
gonna,
yeah,
and
I agree with
you
that.
said,
Yeah.
Yeah, you said that too.
Yeah,
And
and-
remain within the terms of the ordinance.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, so they could develop this.
Less
this chunk-
intrusively, but.
Less intrusive.
Right.
But they could do it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, that's what the point I made earlier, that fundamentally, that denying the variance does not in any way, shape, or form deny substantive use of the property.
It's the last sentence on the worksheet.
Yeah, Which, the one I wrote, Bill?
The one that was passed out.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
It says the property can or cannot be used in strict conformance with the ordinance because, I think the answer is it can be used in strict
Yes, I think it can
conformance
be.
Because
They would go to the
Because
planning
the
board.
ordinance allows it.
development is
The ordinance
permitted in the rural
allows it.
district.
Yeah, and they can go to the planning board and,
Subdivide. yeah.
and subdivide.
Yeah.
And,
And go for planned unit development or whatever that.
they can't go for planned unit
Not
development.
planned, but,
There's no such thing.
yeah, right.
Planned development, sorry,
Planned development.
I threw that unit in there and it's
Yeah,
still
well, I
wandering
did
around.
too.
My apologies.
Yeah, I started that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we have
The
to,
way, just
Sir.
for clarity, for the A, sub 1 and sub 2 and the B, do you want to have specific findings on each of these areas, or are we only looking to
I would
find the
think B.
narrowest of
I would
the
think B.
B in the last sentence in B?
Yeah, I wouldn't think that we need to answer both of those. Each is,
They're exclusive.
they're
It seems like
separated.
they're mutually exclusive, but.
Right.
No, I think they're exclusive, Bill.
That's the impression I got from.
Having,
the-
but wait a second, it says having not been established.
Where
It
is
says
it?
B, first sentence.
Having not been established, right. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, we do need to do that. You're right.
Well, because we probably have established it.
Yeah, I think we've established those two criteria, but we have to spell them out.
Right.
Right,
So
yeah.
now, at this point, the sense of the meeting having been developed, what is your pleasure for proceeding?
I believe that it's 5 and 9. I believe that it would be useful to have a good set of minutes drawn up from this meeting
I think so, too.
and assign one board member to condense the discussion on each of these issues into something that they would be willing to propose as a motion to grant or deny the variance with the findings of fact
Well, we're talking about
summarized.
all the variances or variance number one?
Just the one that.
I think that, I think that the wording should incorporate fact. The wording has to incorporate the extent of the request for relief because it's the size and the full scope of the project that is what we've judged.
That's correct.
And so some wording has to be proposed that encompasses that thought. But I think having one person do it
Yes.
doesn't have to be done in deliberation, it can be done over the next week or two and presented
Is it-
at the next meeting
Is it in our
as a motion.
legal for two people to work on it?
I don't think so. I certainly wouldn't talk to
It
anybody
would-
else about it.
It would
No.
be a little more risky to have two, but that is not the quorum.
It's not the forum.
And therefore, that is not a public meeting, doesn't need it.
I've talked to the town lawyer about that.
I think you're right. think that's the best
There's no
solution.
way I would do it. If,
No, I understand
I
that.
think a
Well,
single person has to do it and has to do it in a vacuum, based on the minutes.
I would agree.
That's my opinion.
Okay.
But the town attorney can tell us whether that's gonna cause problems or not. Having two people work on it.
And then we'd come back for deliberations, working from that draft.
Working
Yes.
from that draft and
Okay.
vote and modifying it to the extent necessary,
Make it a motion.
but voting on the findings and the criterion. That's how I would do it.
I think I agree with that. Now the question is, who is the designated sacrificial victim?
Just looking for a volunteer. There, he raised his hand.
I have a comment though on your, because you did ask the question. I think we need to go, we've essentially confined ourselves to item number one
Yeah.
and substantially to
Right.
multifamily,
Yes.
which we talked about what else needs to be done here. So when we're doing the decision, I think we do have to go take item one apart, put it back together again, and then take item 2 separately and item 3 separately.
Okay,
I agree.
Well,
I agree, but here's the question, Bill. Item 1 contains items 1 and 1A.
Right.
That's fine. Hmm?
And 1B.
What's that?
There's three separate
pieces.
Three separate pieces.
More than 6 units, conversion after the fact, and multifamily. Or always, in my mind, they're all
That's
part
right,
of
it's
that.
4.1, 4.46, and 4.46G.
Right.
Oh, A and G, yeah, right.
Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah, you are.
But, and I know if we say no to multifamily, the other parts of that come apart, but
We need to
we're gonna
answer.
talk about. But nonetheless, if we said yes to 1, we might say no to 2.
Well, let me ask this question about 2. The requested variance from the zoning ordinance to permit the lot coverage is fundamentally, in my thinking right now, subject to the planning board.
Yeah, I don't understand the numbers. It says that the applicant requests an area variance from the zoning ordinance 515C, 515C, and then somehow comes up with a number of 58,913
This is
square
based on that,
feet, isn't it?
yeah, it's based on this leap of faith that you could reinterpret the planning board's mandate to create averaging lots
Right.
to get to numbers like that.
Well, that may be what the basis is, but the specific request is to exceed the 26,000 square foot that's allowed in that section.
5.15C, yes.
Yeah, and I think people could come up with wording that would relate that to the overall scope and the background logic and then deal with the criteria because it's part of the extensive development that's being proposed as a package. And basically use the same variance criteria to deal with.
Is there anything that says, by the way, that one person, I mean, for example, we could have one person do 1A through B, A through C, another person do 2, and another person do 3?
I think it's often done, 11 is done,
Yeah.
like meetings I've been to with their batch of issues.
Does that, I think,
Yeah.
That's the,
All you need is 3 volunteers?
it's been a long time since I dealt with a top sergeant. What
He
I
takes
would-
no prisoners.
I know.
The chair is the first person who can say yea or nay.
Thanks, comrade.
And the vice chair has
Then
no,
vice chair-
and the vice chair has no choice.
Oh,
Rob, between the two of us, who do you think would do the better job on 1?
you.
Thank you, comrade. Tundra, by the way, is how you, tundra, anyway. Okay, I'll give a swing at it.
We'll have minutes.
We'll have minutes. You know what I'd like, actually, on this one, because it's actually pretty complex. The other two, I think, are straightforward, but require a couple of things. If, without talking with each other, would you be willing, Rob, to take a run at it too? And that way we come to the board with 2 different viewpoints on
That's
this.
an idea.
that seems perfect,
Okay.
appropriate.
That way we don't talk, but
Yep.
I'd appreciate that very much. Alan, you're very much, you and Walter are very much good on numbers, et cetera. Which of you would be willing to undertake 2?
I don't care. I don't even know where I'm gonna be. When is the next meeting?
That's later, because we have to go to deliberation.
Yeah, that's important.
Yes, it is.
Hmm?
I mean, I'm, as of next Thursday rather, I'm in Iceland until the 21st.
Okay, that kind of,
We could meet there.
Hmm?
We could meet there.
if the town will fly us up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Bring
the
your winter
applicants
clothes.
and they-
I'll be far north.
Oh.
What day
So-
were you suggesting?
You're leaving on Friday?
We haven't.
Thursday next week,
Which is the 11th.
11th.
11th. And we could try and do it
Before that.
before that. It would be
Sure.
humane to all parties.
We don't have to meet before then. We don't have to meet before then, we just have to have the job done before then.
Right, and then vote on it.
Meet anytime.
Yeah, you don't, once we,
Except like this, you probably want to have some input.
Yeah, you want to have the person who ideally wrote it there
yeah,
presenting.
we would have the two. That's one of the reasons I wanted two versions.
How soon is since you're the key factor, how soon, how soon?
She's
can you get the
generally
minutes?
very fast.
No, okay.
You don't sleep,
No, it doesn't.
okay.
We didn't talk about it individually.
Mhm.
Um,
And then,
When are you back? You're back on
21st.
21st.
yeah, I'm gone a week, then a few days.
So are we looking at the 23rd then?
I'll
Or
be-
do we-
I'll be away.
Or do you
Okay.
before?
I'll be on vacation till midnight the 23rd.
When do you depart, Wayne?
Evening of the 16th.
Okay.
What-
In a very real sense,
Next week?
What's available next week? I
Yeah.
mean, it's gonna
Do you have the room
go
scheduled?
as close as you can to your departure
All
date.
right, Dave's,
Wednesday, how about Wednesday?
Wednesday,
10th?
Dave's going to
10.
get the schedule.
Yeah?
good. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to knock this off before it gets old.
Yeah, I think we should.
Is that not doing there?
At Walter.
You can.
We are in deliberations while we're discussing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why, we can discuss it.
I thought he said we had to be out to discuss.
No, we have to, you're correct.
No.
You
No,
said
we can deliberate it.
We
No,
can discuss
that.
it.
we can
Okay.
discuss
He said no.
But we have to set the meeting out of deliberation.
Yeah, yeah.
We can discuss it beforehand.
Thank you.
That's where we are. And then we have to deal with covered bridges. One of you two, please, or, tell you what, Walter and Alan, would you decide between the two of you, unless, Bill, you want to take on one of these? Hmm?
If Walter or Alan aren't able, then I would do it. But I think they're.
Aren't able?
That was,
Well, that was nicely
deliberate. If you're found incompetent, Walter.
I'll take 2.
Thank you, Walter. Alan?
Yeah, we'll do 3 then.
Wonderful.
And the
Okay.
10th is open for this one.
The 10th, it seems to be open. Okay. 10th at 7, okay. Then, do I hear a motion to leave deliberations?
Move to,
I second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, the board proposes to repeat what we've obviously said, to prepare a set of findings in draft, and then to meet on the 10th of June, at 7:30 in this place, to do the final editings and presentation on these,
And vote.
and to vote upon them.
Does that work?
Hmm?
Does it work?
Then, does this work for everybody in the audience?
In the legal
I
profession?
mean,
We'll make it work one way or the other.
We'll figure it out.
Okay.
I have a conflict, but
Yeah. I mean, in a very real sense, I think you know where we're coming from. And we're simply going to try and do the cleanest job we possibly can to present these things in a fair and equitable way. Okay, do we have any other business before us? Sorry? Yeah, oh, sorry. You are- Thank you, ma'am.
This is really good that you're here, man.
Well, it's really good everybody's here. It's been a long day. I'd like to have a motion to continue the hearing until the 10th of June at 7:30 in this room. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Good. Motion to adjourn?
Keep making it.
Don't move.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so be it.